Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Saturday everybody. Normally the weekend video is very foreign policy and ideology focused, but for today we need to spend some time wrapping up several important economic, financial and technology related developments from this week, which we need to be abreast of before we move into next week. I may do an extra video tomorrow, Sunday, to cover the foreign policy updates, particularly as they relate to China's response to the ongoing crisis in the Middle East. Let's begin today's video by moving through the economic and financial updates. In a new report published this week by McKinsey Group called China Consumption, Start of a New Era, the global management consulting firm argues that China's consumers are not going to be spending big anytime soon, which means companies need to be more strategic to tap what's still a massive market. Daniel Zipser, leader of McKinsey's Asia Consumer and Retail Practice and author of the new report, expressed to US media this week, quote, "I'm hopeful we will see an incremental improvement over the next year, but there are no signs it should be a strong V-shaped recovery," end quote. The report argues after an encouraging start in the first quarter of this year, second quarter and third quarter consumption data confirms what many in the industry have already come to accept. The era of double-digit growth in China's retail sector is over. Third quarter retail sales of goods grew by only 3%, with the recent so-called Double 11 shopping festival only seeing a mere 2% increase over the previous year. The slowdown is evident across various categories, says the report, including cosmetics, 3%, clothing, 4%, and appliances, less than 1%, when compared to the already subdued third quarter of the pandemic-impacted 2022. Despite initial signs of recovery in consumer sentiment from earlier this year, it has now since plateaued, hovering around its all-time low since April, the report argues. Factors contributing to this include a significant drop in residential property transactions, a past pillar of wealth creation, alongside declining exports and concerns about geopolitical tensions. None of these should be surprising to regular China Update viewers. Household savings rates are still significantly higher than pre-COVID levels, 34% versus 30%, with limited signs yet of an additional 53 trillion RMB in savings accumulated since 2020 being funneled into consumption. A notable exception to all of this is the service sector, especially in travel and entertainment. After years of restricted mobility, says the report, there's renewed enthusiasm for travel and socializing in restaurants and bars. Domestic travel has rebounded to surpass 2019 levels too. The report concludes, quote, "So what does this mean for the future, and where does it leave my cautious optimism? China's economy is steadily evolving towards being more consumer-driven. While recovery may be slower than anticipated, and low consumer sentiment could dampen growth rates in the coming months, the long-term prospects of the Chinese market remain robust. Continued urbanization and rising income levels are expected to sustainably drive consumption growth in the medium to long term," end quote. This is assuming, of course, that the housing downturn is cyclical rather than structural. As many regular viewers know, this is not a particularly safe assumption, however. And this leads us to the next development. Yesterday, Friday, a slew of banks, including Industrial and Commercial Bank of China and China Construction Bank, have begun holding discussions with Chinese developers to better understand their funding needs as they step up support for the country's crisis-ridden real estate sector. Chinese financial media outlet Yitai reports today that China Construction Bank, for example, has spoken with representatives from 6 builders, including large players like Longfor Group and China Vanke. The lender will offer credit support, investment banking services, and bond investment, and help them extend or adjust their debt repayment terms, according to the Yitai report. We remember that the People's Bank of China and other top regulators recently held a symposium for banks, urging, or perhaps directing is a better word, the banks to increase their financial support for real estate firms. We later learned that regulators were drawing up a draft list of 50 builders eligible for a range of financial support, including, incredibly, massive unsecured loans. This Yitai report indicates that this is now underway. For a deep dive into this topic and the current state of the housing crisis, see yesterday's video. Now, going from one shaky industry to another, finally for part one of today's video on the economy, Beijing has widened the scope of investigations into Zhongzhi Enterprise Group to include more executives in its affiliates. Last weekend, we learned that the Public Security Bureau of the Chaoyang district of Beijing announced it has launched an investigation into wealth management firms under the Zhongzhi umbrella and taken criminal measures against multiple suspects. In recent days, executives in affiliate companies, including Dalian My Gym Education Technology, an education provider, and Xinjiang Tianshan Animal Husbandry Bioengineering, a cattle breeding company, have disappeared. Yesterday, Chinese financial media outlet Caixin writes, quote, "The disappearance of the two executives is related to the investigations of Zhongzhi-linked wealth management firms whose money-losing bets have left investors nursing billions of yuan in losses." End quote. Zhongzhi, one of China's biggest wealth management firms, recently told investors it is, quote, "severely insolvent," end quote, as opposed to just insolvent, I guess, with a shortfall of $36.4 billion US. And what has happened to that money is a story as old as capitalism. Quote, "A liquidity crisis has been brewing for years at Zhongzhi, but the Zhongzhi-linked wealth management firms were able to cover it up by moving funds around different investment projects and by constantly issuing new investment products to repay maturing ones. But in the past 2 years, as China's economy slowed and market sentiment soured, it became increasingly difficult for the wealth management companies to maintain the facade." End quote. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying today's episode of China Update. I have a huge favor to ask. If you like this channel, if you like China Update and you'd like to see it grow, if you'd like to help me grow the channel and put more resources into the channel, one of the best ways you can do that just takes a couple of clicks, hitting the subscribe button and hitting the like button. Approximately 50% of regular viewers are not subscribed. Subscribing and hitting the like button is one of the best ways to help the channel grow. And for anyone who wants to help keep the channel financially sustainable, keep the channel primarily subscriber supported so it does not have to rely on corporate sponsorships, which is exactly how I've always wanted to keep this channel, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. It's just me making these videos 6 days a week, but with your support, it remains a tremendous pleasure and honor to be able to do it. Thank you so much. Next up, yesterday US outlet Bloomberg published a remarkable long-form piece, which will likely raise eyebrows in Washington, called "China Secretly Transforms Huawei into Most Powerful Chip War Weapon," in which the outlet argues that Beijing is increasingly relying on Huawei, the company Washington tried to destroy, to lead China's efforts to build an independent semiconductor ecosystem. The whole report is worth a read for anyone interested in the space. To end today's video, we quote several selected excerpts directly. Less than 5 years after US sanctions nearly crippled Huawei Technologies Co., the Chinese giant is now Beijing's most important weapon in the battle over semiconductors that's poised to shape the world economy for the decades to come. Huawei's role in China's chip industry goes far beyond what's been previously reported, as well as being the most important customer for chip producers and the country's leading chip designer. Huawei is increasingly engineering expertise and financial support to smaller companies in strategic areas of the chip supply chain. It often does this without disclosing its involvement, which would trigger US restrictions. State support for the company has also reached unprecedented levels. Bloomberg News has uncovered a network of enterprises backed by a Shenzhen city government investment fund, which is focused on helping Huawei build a self-sufficient chip network. This group includes optical specialists, chip equipment developers, and chemical manufacturers. This is in addition to the $30 billion state-sponsored endeavor to help Huawei build chip fabrication facilities. To see how deeply Huawei and the Chinese government are now intertwined, look no further than the launch in August of the new Mate 60 smartphone. The significance of the phone was the high proportion of advanced made-in-China components it contained. In particular, a 7-nanometer processor from Shanghai's Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corp., hailed by state press as a patriotic triumph. It sparked fervent debate within the US about whether its efforts to slow China's technological advance were falling short. Following its blacklisting, Huawei has hired a number of former ASML employees to help work on chip-making machines, according to one person familiar with the matter and social media records. Bloomberg News found LinkedIn profiles of 5 former ASML staff members, including 2 previously based in the Netherlands, who said they joined Huawei between 2021 and 2022. While it will be a long slog to fully catch up, EUV equipment took the West decades and hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. The release of the Mate 60 smartphone suggests a gigantic effort centered on Huawei is making progress. Analysts expect China to keep pouring billions into the chip race, as the consequences of being left behind could be fatal to its ambitions in fast-growing fields like AI. The scale of the subsidies is massive, far beyond what people would usually think, said Dylan Patel, founder of the research group Semi-Analysis. They've built apartment buildings, help with land, and take no income taxes. China doesn't have to establish self-sufficiency at each step of the semiconductor supply chain. The key is to create domestic alternatives at 4 or 5 steps in the process, where the US and its allies can choke off supplies, says Clifford Kurtz, an analyst with S&P Global Ratings. That means China and Huawei will likely focus on concentrated sectors like lithography, wafer production, and electronic design automation. The key thing for Beijing is to have progress in these critical stages, Kurtz said. They have done analysis on the whole supply chain since at least 2014. The purpose of the funding is to invest where they think they can have the most impact. Here ends the direct quote and today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Saturday. There may be an extra episode tomorrow, but if there isn't, I will see you all on Monday.